The room smelled sterile, like something between plastic and bleach. But there was something darker beneath it, an odor not from this earth. Sergeant Cal Moran stood stiff in the corner, arms crossed tight against the dim light glowing off. The chrome walls. He wasn't told much when they summoned him, just that this was part of the exchange initiative, whatever political crap that meant. They used words like reward and trust exercise in the message, but no one trusted anyone up here. The UEN base orbited a dying planet in a forgotten quadrant of the Saran Belt, a place humanity didn't belong and never asked to be. And Cal had been stationed here so long he sometimes forgot the warmth of real sunlight. Then the doors hissed. Open. Two guards rolled in a containment cradle. They handled it like cargo, not like life. Inside, curled up like a discarded doll, lay something that barely looked alive. At first, he thought it was just another automaton, a machine designed to look like a girl. Too thin, too quiet. Eyes closed, skin pale, and marked with violet bruises that glimmered like veins filled with starlight. Her limbs trembled, her fingers twitching with each movement of the pod, as if even the soft cushions were knives. "She hears now," one of the guards said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, courtesy of the Rith Coalition. "Entertainment. Unit fully organic, barely used. Don't break it too fast." Cal didn't answer. The door sealed behind them with a cold thud that sounded too final. He stepped forward cautiously. She didn't move. He could see the marks up close now, some looked like healing burns, others fresh. Her head was shaved in patches where wires must have been torn free. She wore no clothing, just a silver medical shroud draped haphazardly across her frame. A small tag on the pod's rim read only, Specimen 411 Remus status. Irreparable, that word. Sat heavy in his chest. He touched the interface and disabled the restraints. They hissed, unlocking with a reluctant sigh, and she jolted. A soft gasp escaped her as her eyes shot open. And then Cal understood she was no machine, not really. Those eyes weren't synthetic, they were too wide, too terrified. Her irises were not a color he could name, shifting like clouds over an ocean, but it wasn't their beauty that stunned him. It was the emotion trapped inside them. Panic, pain, the raw fear of a creature that had been used and tossed and now, uncertain, faced a new owner. "Hey," he said, kneeling slowly beside her. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't seem to understand, but his tone, maybe, she sensed. Her trembling eased a fraction, and her gaze locked onto him like he was the only thing anchoring her. To the present. Cal glanced at the cradle's diagnostics. Neural scars, trauma loops. Something in her had been shattered, and someone had done it on purpose. They'd wiped her partially, maybe too many times, not to erase her completely. Just to make her obedient. A toy, but still breathing. He sat beside her, not touching, just close enough for her to feel his warmth. They'd expected him to use her, to laugh, maybe brag to the others. But they didn't understand what kind of man he was. He didn't ask for this, and he couldn't ignore the aching truth in those eyes. This was a person, not a specimen. For hours, he stayed there, saying nothing, listening to the hum of distant engines and her slow, uneven breathing. Every now and then, she flinched from sounds he couldn't hear, eyes darting like hunted prey. When she finally let her head rest against the pod's soft wall, exhausted, his heart cracked in a way he didn't think possible anymore. They gave him a broken alien girl for entertainment, but all he saw was someone who needed saving. Asterisk, asterisk, the lights in Cal's quarters dimmed with the false sunset that marked station night cycle, but sleep had no place in that room. He stood at the far end, arms folded again, this time not out of discipline, but because he didn't know what to do with the rising flood inside him. Anger, guilt, helplessness, emotions he trained himself to lock away. But watching her lie on the medical cot now, curled up and flinching at every shift of air, cracked open something he'd long sealed shut. He hadn't even asked her name. Maybe she didn't have one anymore. Maybe they stole it when they broke her, when he'd lifted her from the cradle. Her body had been light, too light, like a bird that had forgotten how to fly. Her skin was hot in some places and icy in others, an imbalance, something off in her nervous system. She didn't speak, not one word. Just watched him with that wary, tired gaze. Every movement measured like it might trigger punishment. Cal remembered his med training basic triage from his time in the outer colonies and scanned her vitals. With a handheld he dug out of storage. The device stuttered, misreading some of her biochemistry. Alien markers bloomed across the screen, coded symbols he couldn't decipher. He sent a quiet query through the console to the ship's eye for medical assistance, but got a sterile denial in response. Unauthorized specimen. No records accessible. Do not interfere. That sealed it. They hadn't just given her to him. They'd abandoned her. He sat beside the cot, slow and careful, resting the scanner on the floor. She didn't look at him, but he could tell she knew. He was there. Her body stiffened slightly with every breath, a rhythm of pain she couldn't escape. He noticed small ridges along her spine, metallic threads under skin, glinting faintly. Embedded tech. Maybe control nodes. Maybe worse. I don't know who did this to you, he said softly, voice rough with held-back fury. But I swear to you, I won't do the same. Still no answer, but her head turned slightly. That tiny movement meant more than words. She was listening. She was still in there. He brought her water, warmed it gently. At first, she recoiled. He didn't push. Just set it near her, stepped back. Hours passed like days. She didn't touch it. Then, suddenly, in the shadow of artificial twilight, she reached for the cup. Her fingers trembled so violently, the water sloshed out, but she drank. Every drop, something unspoken shifted between them. He talked then, more for himself than her. Stories about Earth, about the smell of fresh soil after rain, about coffee so strong it could wake the dead, about the mountain ranges of Colorado, where he was born, where the air was thin and clean. He told her about his dog Max, a mutt with one ear and too much personality. He told her about his sister, gone now, taken by a mining accident on Europa, and how that pain had never quite gone away. He didn't know if she understood his words, but she seemed to understand the emotion behind them, the rawness, the humanity. And when she finally looked at him, truly looked not through him, not past him, something inside her cracked too. Tears welled in eyes that no longer shimmered. With cold data, but with something softer, broken, real. He wiped her face with the edge of his sleeve, clumsy but gentle. You're not a thing, he whispered. You're not a toy. You're not theirs anymore. Her lips parted then, just slightly. Not to speak, just to breathe, for the first time, without fear. That night, she didn't sleep, but she didn't flinch from him anymore. Cal stayed in the chair beside her until his back screamed and his legs went numb. He didn't care. All he cared about was that she was still alive. But she was trying. In the silence, he made a choice. He would not report her. He would not return her. Whatever she was, whatever they'd done to her, he would find a way to undo it. They gave him a broken alien girl for entertainment, but Cal Morin, soldier of Earth, survivor of war, bearer of loss, he saw something else in her. He saw someone worth saving, even if it cost him everything. Asterisk, asterisk. It took days before she let him touch her hand, not because she feared pain, though that fear still lived in her muscles, twitching under her skin, but because she didn't understand what gentleness meant. Every time he approached with open palms, her eyes widened, not in recognition, but confusion. Cal realized she had lived so long with violence disguised as care, she had no template for anything else. He gave her space. Let her lead. Patience had become his weapon now, sharper than any blade he'd ever held. He used it to chip away at the wall around her mind, piece by piece. Her body, though frail, began to respond to basic nourishment. He adjusted the rations, added heat to her room, replicated soft clothes human-sized, clumsily tailored but warm. She refused the garments at first. They frightened her, perhaps in memory of uniforms and straps. So he left them nearby and said nothing. 2 days later, she wrapped herself in them while he pretended not to notice. He kept speaking to her. Stories mostly. Sometimes about battles. Sometimes about silly things. One time he got caught in a monsoon on Mars during a patrol and ended up sliding down a hill like a child. He watched her, always, for the flickers. A twitch of a mouth. A slower blink. The way her gaze lingered just a bit longer on his face each time. She still hadn't spoken. But Cal was learning a new kind of language. One built on silence. Her name came slowly. One night, when the hum of the station dulled to a whisper and the lights had dimmed to a dull blue, he crouched beside her cot. She had been drawing shapes on the blanket with her finger circles, spirals, patterns that repeated in strange rhythms. Do you remember your name? He asked softly. No answer. Then she looked at him, tilted her head, and pointed to her own chest. Her hand moved, unsure, and she tapped slowly. Sia, she mouthed, the sound silent. But it was there. Cal nearly choked. His throat tightened. Sia, he repeated aloud. That's beautiful. And she smiled. It wasn't full, not yet. But her lips curved just enough to catch the faint shimmer of light, and in that fragile expression, Cal felt something inside himself unravel. A man hardened by war, dulled by the weight of orders and silence, found himself blinking fast, covering his eyes with one hand. That was the night they became more than caretaker and patient. More than rescuer and rescued. They became two fractured souls, learning how to rebuild each other. He learned more of her scars, not all physical. When certain tones played over the comms, she would shake uncontrollably. One time, a technician passed by their quarters whistling a tune, and she curled into herself for hours. He never pressed for answers, just held her hand, if she let him, and stayed through the storm's dot and turn. She began to mimic him, not like a child, not exact copying, but echoes. When he sat at the edge of the room to sip from a mug, she'd take the same pose, her hands curled around warm broth. When he stretched his back with a groan, she'd mimic the movement a moment later, eyes darting to his face to see if she was doing it right. One day, she reached forward and brushed her, fingers along the scar above his brow, a clean burn from an energy blast during the Chrysalian breach. He had learned to forget the pain, but her touch made him feel it again, made him remember how he earned it, what it cost. Hurts, she whispered. He gasped, the first sound. Her. Voice quiet and broken, but unmistakably hers. She had chosen to speak for him. Not anymore, he said, voice thick. Not really. She pressed her hand to his scar again, then touched her own shoulder where a deeper, jagged mark had once been hidden. Her eyes didn't flinch this time. Same dot, she didn't say the word. But he understood. Their pain was shared. Different wars. Different wounds. But they were survivors, both. Cal stopped thinking of her as alien. The word no longer meant what it used to. Sia was not human. But she was more than enough. And in her eyes, he finally saw something else besides fear. He saw trust. The first time Cal noticed something strange in Sa's sleep, he thought it was a nightmare. Her breath came in quick gasps, hands clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. A shimmer, like static, rippled beneath her skin, glowing faintly through the fabric of her shirt. He reached to wake her gently, but before he could touch her, a pulse of blue light surged from her chest and blew out the room's overhead panel with a burst of sparks. She jerked upright, coughing, eyes wide and terrified. Cal froze, not because he feared her, but because he realized what she might be. In the seconds that followed, as she looked at the broken lights and then at him, dread bloomed behind her gaze. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came, only a desperate motion of her hands, slapping her chest and shaking her head violently, as if to say, not me, not again. Please don't be afraid. I'm not, Cal said, crouching beside her. But you have to tell me, Sia. What did they do to you? It took hours. He gave her time. Blank sheets of a data slate, a stylus, and his presence not hovering, just near. Eventually, she started to write. Her script was jagged, alien, but with soft curved shapes added human influence. She was adapting, learning his language slowly through exposure. Each word she wrote came slowly, painfully, as if dragging them from a locked vault in her mind. But they came. I was made to break worlds. Cal's skin went cold. She wrote more. Fragments, like splintered glass. Terms she didn't understand but could replicate from memory. Resonance core, neural weapon, symbiote interface. It was military. Tech, some kind of bioweapon hybrid. But not designed by humans. Sia wasn't just some prisoner of war. She wasn't just some slave passed through corrupt alien hands. She had been engineered. Created. A child of war. Her earliest memory was waking. Up in liquid, her body humming with energy, her mind clean of identity. Then pain, lots of it. They told her she was a tool, that she didn't need a name, just obedience. They called her Array 411. They pushed her to the edge of death over and over again, forcing her to trigger what they called harmonic phase surges, the very glow that Cal had seen when she slept. But something went wrong. Or maybe right. Sia resisted. She never activated on the battlefield, refused their orders. Her mind remained intact, damaged, yes, but alive. They tortured her for it, erased and reprogrammed. When that failed, they sold her past her between syndicates, pirates, corrupt officers, until the Rift found her, deemed her unfit, and handed her over to the humans as a show of good faith. She wasn't supposed to be alive. She was supposed to be a warning. Cal read the slate again and again, fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to break things. But Sia was watching him, face pale, eyes hollow. And he realized in her trembling silence that she expected him to walk away. He sat beside her again, carefully, placed his hand over hers. You are not a weapon, he said, voice trembling. You're not what they made you. Her hand twitched, but even now, he could feel it. That faint buzz beneath her skin. Energy. Potential. It terrified him. Not because she could be dangerous, but because he knew what the universe would do to someone like her. If they found out, they would cage her again, or worse. He couldn't protect her here. The station had eyes, surveillance. It was only a matter of time before someone noticed the damage, filed a report, pulled logs, made connections. Already, whispers were spreading about why Cal wasn't showing up for drills, why he'd sealed his quarters off from maintenance crews. He had to make a decision, stay and risk her being. Taken Dot a run, but where could they go? Earth was too far, and even there, politics would devour her. Treat her as another asset, another threat. Cal stared at the ceiling of their quarters, the scent of burnt wires still lingering in the air. He'd served for 12 years. Followed every order, buried comrades, saved strangers. But this wasn't a mission, Dot. This was a person, and he would not let the galaxy eat her alive, Dot, no matter what it cost. The escape plan wasn't born out of cleverness, but desperation. Cal knew the station systems, its blind spots, its rotations, the cracks in the armor where routine dulled vigilance. He'd memorized them without ever intending to use them. But now, those fragments became his salvation. No, her salvation. And maybe, he thought, that was the most human thing about him. When systems failed to offer justice, he chose to become the flaw. Sia still didn't fully understand. She followed his instructions, mimicked his movements, practiced silence. He showed her how to breathe steadily when a patrol passed by their sealed quarters, how to hide the flare in her pulse when fear tried to erupt. Every time the static glow beneath her skin twitched to life, she clenched her fists and cried without sound until it faded. They couldn't afford another surge, another broken light. Not now. They had 2 days. Maybe less. A message had pinned in Cal's private feed one. He wasn't supposed to see, buried in encrypted layers meant for officers above his pay grade. It was simple, cold. A scheduled retrieval. Subject 411 read to be collected for dissection. Prepare cryostorage and restrict access. Notify no one, they knew. He stared at that message for nearly 5 minutes without blinking. The silence in the room was louder than the engines outside. When he turned to look at Sia, she was already watching him. She felt the shift in him. I won't let them take you, he said. We're getting out. We'll find a place where they don't see you. As a thing. Her eyes filled with fear, not of the journey, but of the hope. As if daring to believe him would only make the betrayal worse if he failed. He gathered what little they could carry. Modified a maintenance pod. The thing wasn't meant for travel, just orbital repair, barely big enough for 2 people if they sat close. Its fuel cells were old, unreliable, but it had stealth shielding, and no one would think to look there. The hardest part came the night before their departure. Saya sat on the edge of the cot, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the glow of Earthlight through the observation port. Her hair, now growing in soft tufts, moved slightly with the recycled air. She looked less like a ghost now, but still not free. Why? She asked quietly. Cal turned, startled. Her voice had not returned since that first whisper. He thought maybe it wouldn't, but now here it was soft, like breath on glass. He didn't answer right away, not because he didn't know, but because the answer felt too big to fit in words. Because you deserve to live, he said at last. Not as a weapon, not as someone's possession, just as you. And if no one else sees that, then screw them. I do. Sia blinked slowly. Her lips parted, but she said nothing more. She simply leaned against him, her small frame warm and shaking. He held her close, pressing his forehead gently to hers. We leave tomorrow night, he murmured. We'll take the pod and jump to the debris belt near the old Surin freighters. They'll lose us in the clutter. I'll figure out the rest. Once we're clear. And she nodded. But fate, as it often does, had already shifted the game. That same night, someone knocked on Cal's sealed quarters. A dull, calculated knock. Not a friend. Not a courtesy. Authority. He stood slowly, motioned for Sia to hide in the crawl space beneath the floor one they had reinforced with scrap plating days earlier. She vanished with barely a sound. The door hissed open. Lieutenant Barron, his commanding officer. The man had a face carved from ice and a reputation for loyalty to rules before reason. Sergeant Morin, Barron said, his eyes scanning the room. You've missed 3 drills, ignored summons. Internal diagnostics show a damaged light array and inconsistent power usage from this unit. Any reason for the anomalies? Cal met his stare, cold for cold. I've been sick. Barron didn't blink. We received word of unauthorized biological readings in this wing. You wouldn't happen to be harboring contraband, would you? Cal stepped forward. There's no one here but me, sir. A pause, a stare too long. Then Varen smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. We'll search anyway. Protocol. As two soldiers moved toward the inner room, Cal acted fast, brutal. A strike to the jaw of one, a slam of elbow into the other. They weren't expecting it. He moved like a man with nothing left to lose. Sia burst from the crawl space in a surge of panic, but not before her skin lit up. That glow, that pulse. And in the flash of blue light, everyone in that room understood what she was. Varen gasped. She's awake, he said, not to anyone in particular, eyes wide with horror. Sia's breathing grew frantic. She collapsed. To her knees, arms over her head as the light surged, then faded again. Cal grabbed her. We go, now. There was no more planning, no more waiting. No more mercy. The galaxy had made its move, and Cal Morin had just declared war. Asterisk, asterisk, the station. Alarms screamed before they reached the first junction. Red strobes bathed the corridors in pulsing blood light, and the automated voice of the UEN station AI echoed overhead, calm and cold despite the chaos it announced. Security breach in Sector 9. Unauthorized biological escape in progress. All personnel to lock down stations, engage and detain. They were the hunted now. Cal pulled Sia by the hand, her breath ragged but her steps keeping pace. She didn't need to ask where they were going. She trusted him completely now, and trust, real trust, was the most powerful weapon they had left. Behind them, footsteps clattered like the beat of war drums. He knew they'd follow hard and fast. The moment her body lit up in front of Varen, she became more than a curiosity. She became priority one. They made it to the maintenance hatch just before the first patrol rounded the corner. Cal shoved the emergency override module into the console and keyed in the backdoor code he'd memorized from years of janitorial logistics and pipe schematics. Not glamorous, but it saved them now. The door groaned open, revealing the ladder. Down to the auxiliary shaft, rusty, tight, but it led straight to the docking tier. Below, you first, he said, helping Sia in. She nodded, eyes wide but steady, and disappeared down the tunnel. He followed. The hatch slammed shut behind them down in the dark shaft. The sounds of the chase became muffled, just pounding echoes like distant thunder. Cal dropped the last few rungs and landed beside her, his knees screaming under the weight, but he didn't stop. They moved, half crawling through the narrow passage lit only by the glow of her skin. Pulsing faintly with stress and fear and something more willpower, they reached the docking tier entrance. Another console. Another override. This time, the AI resisted. Clearance denied. Unauthorized launch in progress. Please stand by for security retrieval. Cal growled, slammed his fist into the panel, then yanked off the cover and rewired the core. Sparks kissed his knuckles. The screen flickered, then blinked green. They burst into the hangar. The pod was there. Crude and ugly. A patchwork orb with burn marks and patched hull plating, barely space-worthy. But it had one thing that mattered more than anything else. Autonomy. As they ran, Cal heard the distant hiss of doors opening. Reinforcements. He sealed the hangar behind them, but that would only buy a minute, maybe two. Sia froze in front of the pod. Not from fear, but from the weight of it. Escape was real now. She turned to him slowly, her hand reaching for his, her breath trembling. You don't have to do this, she whispered, voice raw. He looked at her. Yes, I do. She shook her head, almost pleading. They'll kill you. He smiled, bitter and soft. Then they'll have to try harder. They clambered into the pod, sealing the hatch just as gunfire rang out behind them. The outer hangar doors exploded in a cloud of fire and pressure as security teams flooded the chamber. Red beams lit the walls like angry stars. One grazed the pod's shell, sending a jolt through the interior. Cal fired the launch thrusters. Pod screamed as it lifted. Gravity pulled at them like a beast, then vanished in a blink as they entered the void. But the chase wasn't over. A UE interceptor launched after them. Cal gritted his teeth and maneuvered hard, diving into the debris. Belt as planned, twisting the pod through the field of old wrecks and derelict ships like a needle through cloth. Metal scraped the hull, warning sirens shrieked, but he didn't let up. Almost there, he muttered. Behind them, the interceptor closed in. Too fast, too clean. Their pod wasn't built for this. And then, as the enemy ship locked missiles, something shifted in the air inside the pod. A hum. Sa's body began to glow stronger than ever before. Her veins shone with blue fire. Her eyes turned white with energy, but not rage. Purpose. She looked at Cal, and this time, there was no fear, only certainty. I can stop them, she said. But you have to let me. He shook his head. You'll burn yourself out. I'm not what they made me. she whispered. But I can use it just once. For us, Cal reached out, gripping her face gently. Come back to me, she nodded. Then placed her hands against the pod's inner wall. Light exploded. The interceptor was hit by an invisible force. Its shields shredded, its systems fried. The explosion flared silently behind them as the debris absorbed the echo. Inside the pod, Sia collapsed into his arms, glowing faintly like cooling embers. I didn't break, she murmured. And Cal held her tight, eyes wet with rage and awe. No, he said, you were never broken. But deep inside, he knew her power had cost her. She was fading, and they weren't safe yet. The pod drifted silently through the expanse, wrapped in darkness and starlight. Systems offline, engines dead. Shields cracked. Only the emergency life support flickered weakly, casting the cramped chamber in a cold, pulsing glow. Cal sat with her in his lap, arms wrapped tightly around her trembling body, rocking gently even though the pod didn't move. Sia's glow had faded to a dim pulse beneath her skin, like the dying light of a distant sun, but she was breathing shallow and... Slow. He whispered her name over and over, like a song, like a prayer, like a promise. Sia, stay with me, please. I'm right here. Her eyelids fluttered open. She looked up at him, her eyes no longer glowing, no longer strange. Just eyes, human in their grief, in their defiance. He saw her pain, her exhaustion, her fears. Will to live tangled with the threadbare hope she had wrapped around him like a lifeline. I thought I'd disappear, she said. Her voice was weak, the syllables soft and foreign, but he heard them clearly, like all the others. You're not going anywhere, he said, holding her closer. I've got you. Tears slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe them away. Emergency beacon blinked once every 6 seconds, a desperate heartbeat waiting for a miracle, but Cal knew the odds. They were in the Belt's dead zone, a place too distant for trade routes, too dangerous for patrols. It could be days before anyone heard the signal. Weeks, maybe never, and she didn't have weeks. He stared at the emergency supply kit. Inside was a medical injector with a small cartridge labeled Adrenase 3, not designed for her species. But it might buy time. Or it might kill her. She watched him reach for it. Shook her head faintly. No, you'll die without it. Sia touched his face, a gesture not of fear, but surrender. You gave me something better. Cal's throat tightened. What? She smiled through the pain. You gave me a name. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full. A stillness that pressed against his chest made him feel every breath, every beat of his heart like thunder. He felt her presence, not as something fading, but something vast and permanent. She reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulled out the old picture. He kept folded there, his sister smiling with a dog in her arms. Sia studied it, touched the worn edge with reverence. What was she like? She asked. She was like you, he said. Kind, brave, didn't belong to anyone. Sia nodded and closed her eyes. Outside, the stars turned slowly, a quiet audience to this moment in the void. The wreckage of the interceptor floated far behind them, and Cal could almost feel the weight of the universe growing distant. And here, there was only the hush of breath and the low hum of life support running out, and then something answered, a ping on the console. A proximity alert. Weak, distant. The beacon had been received. Cal scrambled forward, hitting the interface with trembling fingers. A signal, a cargo vessel, civilian, undeclared, old-world Earth design, which meant they didn't follow UEN protocols. He sent a burst of coordinates, encrypted distress, species neutral, then waited, every nerve wound tight. The reply came in seconds. Hold course. We see you. Rescue inbound. He turned back to her. We're going to make it, he whispered. You hear me? We're not done yet. But Sia was already unconscious, breath fluttering like moth wings. Cal laid her down gently, wrapped every heating panel around her frail frame. He stayed beside her, cradling her head, whispering stories of blue skies and forests and oceans she had never seen. When the rescue crew broke into the pod an hour later, they found him like that, half frozen, exhausted, with a look in his eyes like he'd been to the edge of the galaxy and chosen to carry someone else back. They took them both in. No questions asked. Sia spent 3 months in recovery. Hidden from the networks, her identity scrubbed from every system Cal could reach. She healed slowly, laughed eventually, smiled more often. Her hair grew long and dark. Her light never glowed again, not like it had, but something inside her still shimmered when she stood in the sunlight of Earth for the first time, barefoot in a field, staring at a sky that had no walls. And Cal? He stayed, not as her guardian, not as her savior, as her friend, Dot is the one who saw her when no one else did. The universe would never know what she had done to save a man who had nothing left to lose. And she would never speak of what he had done to give her something worth keeping. But that was okay, Dot, because sometimes the most powerful thing humanity gives the stars is not its fire, Dot. It is its forgiveness, Dot, its defiance, its heart.